When man was created, his condition was dormant. The dormant elements which he had brought with him had no manifestation. Gradually, the powers inherited by him began to develop, and the same original thought that had caused the primary state being present in man began to manifest itself in proportion to its magnitude. It began to display its actions similar to those related with the divine. But the divine will being diverted downwards, man's thought took up a contrary trend and began to build up its own creation. So in Matadvina, so there are two creations, a divine creation and a man's creation running in parallel. I gave the examples of the water also. You remember the water drop. So I think we read that paragraph. The return, ಇದು ಆಯ್ತು ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ, the return of man's the return of the man's creation will the return of God's creation will come into effect when the time limit fixed by the divine will expires. And the returns of the man's creation of the network interwoven by him will be possible only when he nullifies the force of the vibrations which he had set up for their formation. Since the vibration set up by man was contrary to those of the divine, their crudely grosser form came down into man's being, whereas the divine vibrations, being finely subtler, retained their original character. The difference between the two kinds of vibration is that the former possessed a perversive trend, while the larger, the same as it was originally had. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನೇಚರ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಇರತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು ಎವ್ರಿಥಿಂಗ್ ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಇನ್ ನೇಚರ್ man has a contrary view to that of the divine. So when we clean the samskaras, why do man have a contrary view of the creation? It is because of the samskaras. So when we go on cleaning the samskaras, the force of the contrary view gradually decreases. So it now starts aligning with the divine creation. It's in the same direction. So without samskara being cleared, there is no question of the direction changing. Okay. So Yashas, you're telling this example, being pulled in two different directions. Now you see, Prati Sati sitting ತೊಗೊಳ್ತೀರಾ, we turn the direction towards spirituality. ಮನೆಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ತೀರಾ, you turn it back in the opposite direction. And even if you don't want to turn it back in the opposite direction, it happens. It happens because of the pull of the samskaras. ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, it's like a tug of war. Initially, when you come to the perceptor, the direction of the flow of the energy is changed towards the spiritual direction. But that's very feeble. The effect lasts only for a short period of time. But the pull of the samskaras is already there. By the time you leave the house after the sitting, you are already thinking which hotel to go and what to eat. Right? Just imagine. So what will you eat? The thing that you like is what you eat. Now, how do you like a particular thing? It is because of the samskaras. See how the samskaras immediately take over your life, even without doing anything. And then gradually you go. Based on the pull of the samskaras will say, go to SLV, go to Nachias, go to that hotel, this hotel. You will automatically start going there. You don't even know that you are actually being led there by the samskara. See how we actually just follow the samskara so blindly without even realizing, why can't I try some new hotel today? Why can't I try some new dish today? Forgetting about all the likes and dislikes that I've had, let me try something new. Let me see what happens. Now that is a spiritual state where you are actually going for something new. You might actually, let's say, eat the same idli vada, but if you go to a different hotel and try something new, there is some degree of newness there. I'm talking about eating outside. So if you're cooking at home, you keep changing the recipe, this way or that way, tweak the recipe. You use a different ingredient. Like I keep telling Gopal Krishna, we like uppitu lot in our house. So we can make 5, 6 types of uppittu, and we eat very happily. All of us eat it. ಆಯ್ತಾ. ಈರುಳ್ಳಿ ಉಪ್ಪಿಟ್ಟು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, ನಿಂಬೆಹಣ್ಣು ಉಪ್ಪಿಟ್ಟು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಆಮೇಲೆ ಈರುಳ್ಳಿ ಟೊಮೆಟೊ ಉಪ್ಪಿಟ್ಟು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಶಾವಿಗೆ ಉಪ್ಪಿಟ್ಟು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, ತರಕಾರಿ ಉಪ್ಪಿಟ್ಟು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಅಕ್ಕಿ ತರಿ ಉಪ್ಪಿಟ್ಟು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಬನ್ಸಿರವೆ ಉಪ್ಪಿಟ್ಟು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಐ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಲಿಸ್ಟ್ ಆಲ್ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ ಲೈಕ್ 8 to 10. The point is, you always keep trying something new. ನೆನ್ನೆ ಹೇಳಿದ್ನಲ್ಲ, ಹಲಸಿನಕಾಯಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚಿದಾಗ ಕಾಯಿ ಇತ್ತು, ಹಣ್ಣಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ, ಎಲ್ಲ ತೊಗೊಂಡು ಕಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಚಿಪ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾಯ್ತು. ಈಗ ತಾನೇ ಕಾಫಿಗೆ ಟೀ ಕುಡಿತಾ ಒಂಚೂರು ಚಿಪ್ಸ್ ತಿನ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬಂದೆ. ಆಯ್ತಾ. ಗೋಪಾಲ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದ ಮಧ್ಯಾಹ್ನ, ನಾನು ಎಷ್ಟು ಫುಡಿ ಅಂತ. ಅವ್ನು ನಾನು ಎಷ್ಟು ಫುಡಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ನನಗೆ ಹೇಳೋದು ಅವ್ನು ಹೇಳ್ಕೊಂಡ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಆಯ್ತು. ಅವ್ರು ಇವಾಗ ನೋಡಿ ಇಬ್ರಿಗೂ ಹೇಳ್ತೇನೆ ಅಂತ, ಸಮಾಧಾನ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಡ್ತೇನೆ, ಬ್ಯಾಲೆನ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡೋಣ ಇಬ್ರಿಗೂ ಅಂತ. ಓಕೆ ಆಯ್ತು. ಸೊ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಆಲ್ ರೈಟ್. ಯಾರಾದ್ರೂ ನೀನು ಫುಡಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ನೀ ಹೇಳು, ರಾಮಕೃಷ್ಣ ಪರಮಹಂಸರು ಫುಡಿ ಆಗಿದ್ರು, ನಾನು ಅವ್ರ ಥರನೇ, ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾನು ಫುಡಿ ಅಂತ. ಆಯ್ತು. ಯು ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಎ ವೆರಿ ಗುಡ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ಟು ಗಿವ್. ಮೈ ರೋಲ್ ಮಾಡೆಲ್ ಇಸ್ ರಾಮಕೃಷ್ಣ ಪರಮಹಂಸ, ಸಿನ್ಸ್ ಹಿ ವಾಸ್ ಅ ಫುಡಿ, ಐ ಆಮ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಫುಡಿ ಲೈಕ್ ಹಿಮ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ರಿ ಅಷ್ಟೆ. ಆಯ್ತು. ಸೊ ಅಂತೂ ಪ್ರವೀಣ್ ಬಂದ್ರು ನೋಡಿ. ಪ್ರವೀಣ್ ನಾನು ಫುಡಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಚಕ್ ಅಂತ ಆನ್ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡ್ರು. ನನ್ನೆಲ್ಲಿ ಬಿಟ್ರಿ ಅಂತ. ಅವೇನ್ರಿ. ಸರಿ, ಹಾಗಾದ್ರೆ ಸೊ the contrary view that we take towards the reality does not change until unless we actually come out of the effect of the samskaras. That's very, very important. That is the reason why you have to take regular sittings. Now, there are a lot of abhyasis who say we do our practice regularly. No amount of practice by the abhyasi, even whether the meditation or the cleaning, is going to get them substantially cleared off of the samskaras. So even if they do the practice regularly, now you tell me from first chakra to second chakra, how long does it take to go? I had given the maths to somebody.
Without spirituality, like without meditation.
Without pranahuti, if you just meditate at home, how long does it go from one point to second point?
44 years.
40?
44 years.
44 years. ಒಂದು ಕಡಿಮೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾನೆ ಇವನಿಗೋಸ್ಕರ ಒಂದು ಕಡಿಮೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾನೆ. ಒಂದು ಕಡಿಮೆ -1 ಅಂತ. ಸೊ 45 years. 45 ಎಲ್ಲ 5 ಸಲ ಬರುತ್ತಪ್ಪ. ನಾವು ಕೈ ಇಟ್ಕೊಡ್ರಿ ಪಂಚಪಾಂಡವರ ತರ. ಪಂಚಪಾಂಡವರು ಒಟ್ನಲ್ಲಿ 5.
Next to again multiplied by 2.
ಅಲ್ಲೂ ಕಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ತಾನೆ. ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಡ್ತಾನೆ ಅವನ ಜರ್ನಿಗೋಸ್ಕರ.
multiplied by 5.
ಮಲ್ಟಿಪ್ಲೈಡ್ ಬೈ 5. ಸೊ 45 into 5 ಎಷ್ಟಾಯ್ತು? 45 into 5 ಯಾರಿದಪ್ಪ ಮ್ಯಾಥ್ಸ್ ಪ್ರವೀಣ್ರು? ನೀ ಹೇಳ್ತಿದ್ ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಿಲ್ಲ.
225.
225. ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ ಇಂದ ಥರ್ಡ್ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ ಬಂದ್ವಿ 225 years ಅಲ್ಲಿ. ಥರ್ಡ್ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ ಇಂದ 4 ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ಗೆ ಇಂಟು 5 ಮತ್ತೆ
1125.
1225.
1125.
1125 ಮತ್ತೆ ಇಂಟು 5 ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್. ಸೊ ಆತರ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಲಿಟರಲಿ by the time you come into the Brahmanda, you would have literally crossed almost more than 10,000 years. That's why people used to say that liberation is many life efforts. It takes many lives to get liberation. That's the reason why you read that in the scriptures. But that is not what we do in our life. In our system, it's a totally different thing. ಕರೆಕ್ಟಾಗಿ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಸಾಧನ, ಕರೆಕ್ಟಾಗಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸಿಟ್ಟಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ತಗೊಂಡು, ಇಫ್ ಯು ಯುಟಿಲೈಸ್ ಆಲ್ ದ ಫ್ಯಾಕಲ್ಟೀಸ್ ದಟ್ ಗಾಡ್ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ಗಿವನ್ ಯು, ಸೊ ಜ್ಞಾನಯೋಗ, ಭಕ್ತಿ ಯೋಗ, ಕರ್ಮಯೋಗ, ರಾಜಯೋಗ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮಾಡಿದರೆ ಕರೆಕ್ಟಾಗಿ 7 to 10 years ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಯು ಶುಡ್ ಬಿ ಏಬಲ್ ಟು ಕ್ರಾಸ್ ದ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮಾಂಡ. 18 ವರ್ಷಕ್ಕೆ ನೀವು ಶುರು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ 28 ವರ್ಷ ಮದುವೆ ಆಗ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಮುಂಚೆ ಲಿಬರೇಷನ್ ಆಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಮದುವೆ ಆಗ್ಬೋದು. ಅವಾಗ ದಟ್ಸ್ ದ ಬೆಸ್ಟ್ ಇನ್ಶೂರೆನ್ಸ್ ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ಯುವರ್ ವೈಫ್. ಯು ಆರ್ ಲಿಬರೇಟೆಡ್. ಅದಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಕರೆಕ್ಟಾಗಿ ಸಾಧನೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ 5 to 7 years ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಪೂರ್ತಿ ಸೆಂಟರ್ವರೆಗೂ ಹೋಗ್ಬೋದು. ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಜರ್ನಿ ಅಪ್ವರ್ಡ್ಸ್ ಇಸ್ ಪ್ರಿಟಿ ಫಾಸ್ಟ್. ಇಲ್ಲೇ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಟೈಮ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ಯಾಕೆಂದ್ರೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಸಂಸ್ಕಾರ ಇಳಿತಾ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ. ಒಂದ್ಸತಿ ಮೇಲ್ಗಡೆ ಹೋಯ್ತು ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ವೆರಿ ಈಸಿ. ಸರಿ, ಅಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಭಾರತ ಸಂಸ್ಕಾರಗಳು ಅಲ್ಲಿರಲ್ಲ. ಸಂಸ್ಕಾರಗಳಿರುತ್ತೆ, ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ತಿಳಿಯಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ ಸಂಸ್ಕಾರಗಳು. ಬಟ್ ಏನಂದ್ರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಹುಷಾರಾಗಿರ್ಬೇಕಾಗಿರೋದು ಈಗೋ. ಮೇಲ್ಗಡೆ ಸಂಸ್ಕಾರಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಈಗೋ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಕಾಟ ಕೊಡುತ್ತೆ, ಕೆಳಗಡೆ ಸಂಸ್ಕಾರ ಕಾಟ ಕೊಡುತ್ತೆ. ಹುಡುಗರನ್ನ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಮದುವೆ ಮುಂಚೆ ನನಗೆ ಅಪ್ಪ ಅಮ್ಮ ಕಾಟ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ಮದುವೆ ಆದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಹೆಂಡತಿ ಕಾಟ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಆಯ್ತಾ? ಗೋಪಾಲ ಕೃಷ್ಣನಿಗೆ ಇವಾಗ ಯಾರ್ದು ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ, ಅವನಿನ್ನೂ ಮದುವೆ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ. ನಾನು ಯಾರ್ದಪ್ಪ ಕಾಟ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೇನೆ ಅಂತ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ.
ಇಲ್ಲ, I meant, what is the benefit of, I mean, liberation has a general benefit, but what is it specific to marriage that
ಸ್ಪೆಸಿಫಿಕ್ ಟು ಮ್ಯಾರೇಜ್. ಮ್ಯಾರೇಜ್ ಆದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಯು ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಟು ಲರ್ನ್ ಟು ಗಿವ್ ಸ್ಪೇಸ್ ಟು ಅದರ್ ಪರ್ಸನ್ ಇನ್ ಲೈಫ್. ದಟ್ಸ್ ದ ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಬಿಟ್. You have to share space. You have to learn to tolerate the liking and the disliking of the other person. You have to learn to tolerate the emotions of the other person. You have to learn to tolerate the samskaras or the emotions that they impose on you because of the virtue of the closeness of the relationship. ಆ ಟಾಲರಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬರಬೇಕು. ಆ ಟಾಲರಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬರ್ಬೇಕಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಲಿಬರೇಷನ್ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡು ಮದುವೆ ಆಯಿತು ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ದಟ್ಸ್ ದ ಬೆಸ್ಟ್ ಇನ್ಶೂರೆನ್ಸ್ ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಹ್ಯಾವ್. Because by that time you will have a good ability to handle the samskaras that not only you create but others actually throw at you. You also have a good ability to manage the situations in such a way that you can actually act in a less conflicting way. ಆಯ್ತಾ? ಟಾಲರೇಷನ್ ಬರುತ್ತೆ, ಕಾನ್ಫ್ಲಿಕ್ಟ್ ರೆಸೊಲ್ಯೂಷನ್ ತಕ್ಕ ಮಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಬರುತ್ತೆ, ಶೇರ್ ಮಾಡುವಂಥ ಕೆಪಾಸಿಟಿ ಬರುತ್ತೆ, ಸೆಲ್ಫ್ಲೆಸ್ ಲವ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಮೂರನೇ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ಗಿಂತ ಕೆಳಗಡೆ ಇಟ್ಟು ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ವಿ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಓನ್ಲಿ ಡೂ ಸೆಲ್ಫಿಶ್ ಲವ್. ಬಟ್ ಲಿಬರೇಷನ್ ಆದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಆಕ್ಚುಲಿ ಡೂ ಸೆಲ್ಫ್ಲೆಸ್ ಲವ್. ಸೊ ಯು ವಿಲ್ ಲರ್ನ್ ದಟ್ ಆರ್ಟ್. ಸೊ ದೇರ್ ಆರ್ ಕ್ವೈಟ್ ಎ ಫ್ಯೂ ಪಾಸಿಟಿವ್ಸ್ ದಟ್ ಯು ವಿಲ್ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಇಫ್ ಯು ಗೆಟ್ ಮ್ಯಾರಿಡ್ ಆಫ್ಟರ್ ಲಿಬರೇಷನ್. ಸರಿ, it's one of the best insurance to have. And I'm just talking about in a funny way about marriage, but then it is necessary for every other interactions that you have in this world. So when you can look at it from a higher perspective than from the ground perspective, it makes a big difference. You don't feel as stressed out as you would otherwise feel in a ground level situation, because you are far away from the area of conflict. ಸರಿ, ಸೊ ಯಾವುದು ತಲೆಗೆ ಹಚ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಲ್ಲ, ಆರಾಮಾಗಿರ್ತೀರ. ಸೊ ವಿಲ್ ಫೀಲ್ ಮೋರ್ ಅಟ್ ಈಸ್. ದಾಜಿ ಬರೀತಾರಲ್ಲ, ವೆನ್ ದ ಹಾರ್ಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಅಟ್ ಪೀಸ್ ದ ಮೈಂಡ್ ಈಸ್ ಅಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಅಂತ. ಸೊ ಆ ಥರ. ಅಂಡ್ ದೆನ್ ಇಫ್ ಯು ಆರ್ ಲಿಬರೇಟೆಡ್ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಯು ವಿಲ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಅಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಎ ಚೈಲ್ಡ್ ಹೂ ಇಸ್ ಲುಕಿಂಗ್ ಫಾರ್ ಎ ಪೇರೆಂಟ್ ಹೂ ಇಸ್ ಲಿಬರೇಟೆಡ್. The soul that you are going to get as a child will be a highly spiritually evolved soul. And that's a very important thing. Right? You can attract souls at a finer vibrations. So there are multiple benefits actually. That's why you should try to bring the abhyasis by around 15-16 you should start. See, earlier they were not even giving permission. Now they are giving permission anyway. Why not start early? Alva. Whatever might be the reason why you start. You might start because you want to concentrate. You might start because you want to get better marks in PUC or 10th. The reason doesn't matter. But the spiritual work goes on. So, ಸರಿ, ಹಾಗಾದ್ರೆ ಮದುವೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬರೋಣ ಇವಾಗ ವಾಪಸ್ಸು. ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಬರೀ ಯಂಗ್ಸ್ಟರ್ಸ್ನ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಯಾವಾಗಲೂ ಬರೀ ಮದುವೆ ವಿಚಾರನೇ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಿರ್ತಾರೆ. ಆಯ್ತು, ಸರಿ. ಹಾಗಾದ್ರೆ all the powers residing in the absolute are present in the man, because his thought force comprised of all the particles that were present at the time of the main state. But since they possess an inward tendency, their working took a different course, and the faculties possessed by him began to be utilized in a reverse way. All this combined together promoted the growth of the intricacies. Every particle of it became strong and powerful like that of God's creation. In this way, man has brought into being a tiny creation of his own. ಸೊ ಎರಡು ಕ್ರಿಯೇಷನ್ ಇದೆ. ಅಟ್ ಎನಿ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಎರಡು ಕ್ರಿಯೇಷನ್ ಇದ್ದೇ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಇಫ್ ಮ್ಯಾನ್ ಡಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಇಂಟರ್ಫಿಯರ್, ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ದ ಡಿವೈನ್ ಕ್ರಿಯೇಷನ್ ದಟ್ ಡಾಮಿನೇಟ್ಸ್, ದಟ್ ಮ್ಯಾನಿಫೆಸ್ಟ್. ಓನ್ಲಿ ವೆನ್ ವಿ ಇಂಟರ್ಫಿಯರ್ ಅಲ್ಲ, ವಿ ಚೇಂಜ್ ದ ಕೋರ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಡಿವೈನ್ ಕ್ರಿಯೇಷನ್. ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಅವರ್ ಇಂಟರ್ಫಿಯರೆನ್ಸ್ ವಿಟ್ ಆಕ್ಚುಲಿ ಕಾಸಸ್ ಇಶ್ಯೂಸ್. ಏನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಇದ್ರೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ತನಗೆ ತಾನಾಗೆ ನಡ್ಕೊಡುತ್ತೆ. ಈಗ ನೋಡು, ಸೀಸನ್ಸ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ತನಗೆ ತಾನಾಗೆ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ನಾವೇನು ಮಾಡಲ್ಲ. ಕರೆಕ್ಟಾ? ಸೂರ್ಯ ತನ್ನ ಬರ್ತಾನೆ, ಚಂದ್ರ ತನ್ನ ಬರ್ತಾನೆ, ಇಬ್ರು ತನ್ನ ಹೋಗ್ತಾರೆ, ನಾವೇನ್ ಮಾಡಲ್ಲ. ಬಿಟ್ರೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ತನ್ನ ಇರ್ತಾನೆ. ಈಗ ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಇಲ್ದಿರ ನಮ್ಮ ಎಲಾನ್ ಮಸ್ಕ್ ಸೂರ್ಯನ ರೌಂಡ್ ಹೊಡಿಸ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾನೆ. ಚೈನಾದವರು ನಾವು ಆರ್ಟಿಫಿಷಿಯಲ್ ಸೂರ್ಯನ ಕ್ರಿಯೇಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂತ ಗಲಾಟೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸೊ ನೇಚರ್ ಏನಿದೆ ಅದನ್ನ ಹಾಗೆ ಇಡಕ್ ಬಿಡ್ತೀರಾ, ನಾವು ಏನೇನೋ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಶುರು ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ. ಸರಿನಾ? ಅದು ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಏನಾಗತ್ತೆ, ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. Because when you try to interfere with nature, it also had some kind of a bandwidth of tolerability. ಇಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ಆ ಟಾಲರಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಯಿತು ಅಂತಂದರೆ, ತಡ್ಕೊಳಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗಲಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂದರೆ, ಇಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ರಿಯಾಕ್ಟ್. ದೆನ್ ಯು ಸಿ ಹ್ಯೂಜ್ ಅಮೌಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ನ್ಯಾಚುರಲ್ ಡಿಸಾಸ್ಟರ್ಸ್. ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ವಾಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾಪನ್ಸ್. ನ್ಯಾಚುರಲ್ ಡಿಸಾಸ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ನಾರ್ಮಲಿ ನಾವೇನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ, ಇಟ್ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾಪನ್ಸ್ ಬೈ ಆಕ್ಸಿಡೆಂಟ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಪ್ರಕಾರ. ಇಟ್ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾಪನ್ಸ್. ವಿ ಡೋಂಟ್ ಅಟ್ರಿಬ್ಯೂಟ್ ಎ ರೀಸನ್. But our ancestors attributed reason for everything. So nothing happens without a reason. So if there's an earthquake, it happens for a reason. Although we look at the reasons as two plates rubbing against one another. That's what we look at it as. Earthquake ಆಯಿತು ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ two tectonic plates rub ಆಗ್ತಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ, ಒಂದ್ರ ಕೆಳಗಡೆ ಒಂದು ಹೋಗ್ತಿದೆ ಅಂತ. But our ancestors had a different idea behind it, the reason. ವಾಲ್ಕೆನೋ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ವಾಲ್ಕೆನೋ ಎರಪ್ಷನ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಆಲ್ ದೀಸ್ ಥಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ ಲುಕ್ಡ್ ಅಟ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ಎ ಫಿಸಿಕಲ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಪರ್ಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಇನ್ ಎ ಡಿಫರೆಂಟ್ ವೇ. Compared to a metaphysical perspective, it is looked at in a slightly different way. The metaphysical perspective looks at the broader picture and tries to give a reasoning. A physical perspective looks at the narrower picture and tries to give a reasoning. That's all it is. All his faculties, being thus animated, grew strong and restive, and his mind and thought began to cooperate with them. This resulted in the creation of a world of thoughts. The balance was disturbed and a conflicting tendency began to develop. One faculty now induces him to have a walk in the open, other stops him from doing so on the ground of catching cold. The third one presents another view, and the fourth one still another. The fifth one began to think of earning money, and the sixth one suggests the undertaking of some employment. The seventh one dissuades him from undertaking excessive hard work for the purpose. The eighth one recommends the establishment of cordial attachment with some rich relation so as to capture his heart and offer him inducement to transfer his entire wealth to him. Another faculty comes forth to declare that all this is quite useless so long as he does not get married and have children to enjoy this wealth. He finally gets married and has children too. Now the problem of their education comes in, and they grow as they grow up. This is exactly what happens to everybody in their life. He's just told about everybody's life story. Right. Further, hearing of the nice, now ಈಗ ಯಂಗ್ಸ್ಟರ್ಸ್ಗೆ ಇನ್ನೂ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಕಿವಿ ದೊಡ್ಡದಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಈಗ. Hearing of the nice acting of one Jamila, he was tempted to go to the theatre. He went there and witnessed the show several times. The coquettish movements of Jamila captured his heart, and he was induced to attend the show again and again. Everything of Jamila began to attract his heart. This led to the commencement of love. Now he began to pine over the same thought, giving further strength to it by turning this into a habit. The network thus began to grow more and more manifested. The habit excited in him a tendency to look upon every similar thing as Jamila. Now he began to think of having money sufficient enough to satisfy his lusty desires, but the constant thought of Jamila offered him no time to earn money by lawful means. So he at last began to think of stealing, but at the same time feared prosecution and imprisonment. But the thought of Jamila had caught him so tightly that he at last resorted to stealing, an unfair means. Now imagine what he originally was and what he finally have been led to become by the effect of his thoughts which has entrapped him so tightly. Similar incidents added further to the intricacies of the net, giving greater strength to it by the effect of his thought, which fomented them all the more. The grossness went on increasing. Its resultant effect led to the development of further evils like passion, anger, lust, etc. In short, a complete conglomerate was formed. Then retracing from it now becomes can only be effected only by the process of casting away all that he had taken in previously, and by removing the perversion of thought by fixing it firmly in the right direction. So, fixing the thought in the right direction and the fixing it on the divine. Once you fix the thought on the divine, all the perverse directions in which the thought is flowing will gradually start getting withdrawn. ಸರಿನಾ ಅವಾಗ ಏನು ಮಾಡುತ್ತಂದ್ರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಯಶಸ್ಸು ಹೋಟ್ಲು ಹುಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗೋ ಬದಲಿಗೆ ಟೆಂಪಲ್ಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಪ್ರಸಾದ ತಿಂದು ಮನೆಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂತ ತಲೆ ಅಲ್ಲಾಡಿಸ್ತಾನೆ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಯಾವ ಟೆಂಪಲ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿರೋ ಪ್ರಸಾದ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಲಿಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಡ್ತಾನೆ. ಆಯ್ತು, that is what happens. ಆಯ್ತಾ? See how we actually fall into the trap. This is nothing but the journey of everyone's life up to 30 years of age. ಇದೇನು ಡಿಸ್ಕ್ರೈಬ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ ಇಲ್ಲಿ 30 ವರ್ಷದವರೆಗೂ ಆಯ್ತಪ್ಪ ಇದು. 30 ವರ್ಷ ಆದಮೇಲೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಪೊಲಿಟಿಷಿಯನ್ಸ್ ಕರಪ್ಷನ್ ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರಲ್ಲ, ಆ ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಪ್ಯಾರಾಗ್ರಾಫ್ ಏನು ಬಿಡಿದಿರಲ್ಲ ಅದೆಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ಮ ಪೊಲಿಟಿಷಿಯನ್ಸ್ಗೆ ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಅರ್ನಿಂಗ್ ಬೈ ಅನ್ಲಾಫುಲ್ ಮೀನ್ಸ್ ಅದು ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಏನು ಬಿಡಿದಿರಲ್ಲ, ಲಸ್ಟ್, ಗ್ರೀಡ್, ಪ್ಯಾಷನ್, ಆಂಗರ್, ಟೆಂಪ್ಟೇಷನ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಎವ್ರಿಥಿಂಗ್ ಅಪ್ಲೈಸ್ ಟು ದ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಹೂ ಆರ್ ಇನ್ ಪೊಸಿಷನ್. ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲ ಅಟ್ಲೀಸ್ಟ್ ಕಾಮನ್ ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜ್ ಒಂದಿಷ್ಟು ಭಯ ಅಂತ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಅದೂ ಇರಲ್ಲ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ 4ನೇ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅಟ್ ದ 4th ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ ಯು ನೀಡ್ ಟು ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಸಮ್ ಡಿಗ್ರಿ ಆಫ್ ಫಿಯರ್. ಇಫ್ ಯು ಬಿಕಮ್ ಟೂ ಫಿಯರ್ಲೆಸ್ ದೆನ್ ದಟ್ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಆಕ್ಚುಲಿ ಕಾಸ್ ಹೆವಾಕ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್. ಅರ್ಥ ಆಯ್ತಾ? ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಭಯ ಇರಲಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ 25-30 ವರ್ಷ ಆಗೋಷ್ಟು ಬೈ ದ ಟೈಮ್ ಯು ಕಮ್ ಟು 25-30 you no longer fear your parents, right? So that's why they get a partner for you, they marry you so that you fear your partner at least. ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗ್ತಿದೆಯಾ? Why the people marry you? They marry you so that at least there is some new person in your life who you actually fear. With parents too you have spent 25-30 years, so you no longer fear them, you take them for granted. That is what happens. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಮದುವೆ ಯಾಕೆ ಹಾಕ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಮೂಗ್ದಾರ ಹಾಕೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಹಸುಗೆ ಮೂಗ್ದಾರ ಹಾಕ್ತಾರಲ್ವಾ, ಹಸುನ್ ಕಂಟ್ರೋಲ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ. ಸೊ ಗಂಡು ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆ ಮೂಗ್ದಾರ ಹಾಕ್ತಾರೆ ಮದುವೆ ಮಾಡಿ, ಹೆಂಡತಿ ಕಂಟ್ರೋಲ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ. ಅವ್ರ ವಿಷಯ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಕಂಟ್ರೋಲ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ. ಎನಿವೆ, ಸೊ ನಾವು ದಿಸ್ ಇಸ್ ವಾಟ್ ಎವ್ರಿ ಒನ್ ಆಫ್ us have done up to 30 years of age. Now, if you are in spirituality, you can take a reverse direction. All that you have to do is think of the divine all the time. That is divine remembrance, constant remembrance. What did Vajpayee brother say yesterday about constant remembrance? ಇಬ್ರು ಇದ್ರಲ್ಲ, ಯಾರೋ ಒಬ್ಬರಾದ್ರೂ ಹೇಳ್ರಪ್ಪ. Both of you were there, right and left.
ಆನೆಸ್ಟ್ಲಿ ಕೇಳಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ.
ಹೊರಗಡೆ ಕೂತಿದ್ದೆ ಅಲ್ವಾ, ನಾನು ನೋಡಿದೆ ಹೊರಗಡೆ ಕೂತಿದ್ದೆ.
ಎಲ್ಲ ಕೇಳಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ವಿ ಬೋತ್ ಆರ್ ಸ್ಪೀಕಿಂಗ್ ಸಮಥಿಂಗ್ ಎಲ್ಸ್ ಎಂಟೈರ್ಲಿ. ಸಾರಿ.
ಇಬ್ರು ಕೇಳಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡಿಲ್ಲ ಹಾಗಾದ್ರೆ. ಓಕೆ, ಬೋತ್ ಆರ್ ಪಾರ್ಟ್ನರ್ಸ್ ಇನ್ ಕ್ರೈಮ್ ದೆನ್. ಸರಿ, ಏನಂದ್ರೆ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಥಿಂಕಿಂಗ್, ದಟ್ಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ರಿಮೆಂಬರೆನ್ಸ್. ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟೆಂಟ್ಲಿ ಫೀಲಿಂಗ್ ದ ಪ್ರೆಸೆನ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಮಾಸ್ಟರ್ in every activity that you do. So this activity that I'm doing, would master approve of this? If he were to be here now, would he approve of what I'm doing? So can that activity be done in the presence of the master? So the constant remembrance is more like feeling the presence of the masters continuously, rather than constantly thinking about the master. Of course, it is easy to say feel the presence, but that will not come before we do the other thing which we have described previously. You start with a conscious thought, it goes to the subconscious, and then gradually it gathers energy, it expands, and then eventually you start feeling the presence of the master all the time. That's how it works. Okay, so you don't jump from thought to presence directly. Nobody jumps. It's a process that you have to undergo before you end up feeling the presence of the master in all the activity. That is why whenever you are doing any activity, think of the master and do it. In that way, you are constantly remembering him. But over a period of time, when the remembrance becomes intense, you start feeling the presence. That's how it works. You know? So ultimately, the constant remembrance should actually lead you to a state where you constantly feel the presence of the master in your heart. Maybe initially you will feel the presence of the master at a physical level. Oh, ಇಲ್ಲೇ master ಪಕ್ಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂತಿದ್ರೆ ಏನು ಹೇಳೋರು? What would the master say if he's sitting here now, if he's with us now? So that's like at a physical presence. Over a period of time, that presence also will be, what do you say, imbibed. And then you will just feel the presence in the heart all the time. ಸರಿನಾ? ಹೇಳಪ್ಪ ಗೋಪಾಲ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣ.
Probably a question we can take up also when talking about constant remembrance in depth. But my point was, it starts with thinking anta bantu. But if a
Starts with a
person,
thought. It starts with a thought. You don't think about it consciously. You start with a conscious thought, put it into the subconscious. Pay attention to it on and off. You don't constantly think about it. If you think about it, it becomes a samskara. You just pay attention to it on and off. That's all. Don't think about it. If you think about it, it becomes a samskara. If you just pay attention to it on and off, say for example, you take the thought that okay, we are now doing the book reading. It's the master who is doing the book reading. That's it. One thought. After that, during the course of the entire session, you will not think about it again. You got the point? So it's not constant thinking. So you change the activity. Suppose you finish the book reading and then you go and do prayer. Now you think that master is helping you to do it. Then you go and have something to eat. Then you say that master himself is eating it. So you only have that one thought, or whenever you change the activity, you remember the master once. That's all. So that gradually becomes bigger and bigger. It grows in the subconscious. It becomes an automatic process. Before every activity that you do, you remember the master. Every time you remember the master, you add energy to that thought. What happens to the thought? It goes further into the subconscious. It becomes bigger, expands. When it goes to the bottom of the subconscious, it actually starts drawing energy from the subconscious by itself. Like a plant's root system, as it penetrates the earth, over a period of time, it develops the ability to draw the resources from the earth itself. It does not wait for you to water it. Initially, while it is growing, it expects you to water it. But once it grows to a certain level, it does not wait for your watering. It will just start drawing the things necessary for its growth directly from the earth. Okay, that's exactly what happens to constant remembrance. It goes out of your awareness eventually, but it starts drawing energy from the subconscious at the bottom of the subconscious. So then you can see that your energy is happening very fast. It's unfolding very fast. It's like a plant. How do you differentiate a plant which is dependent on your watering versus a plant which can actually manage its own resources from the earth? How do you differentiate? That plant which is still dependent on your watering, if you don't water it for 2 days, it appears shrunken. It starts drying out. But that plant, which is already started taking the resource directly from the earth, it doesn't matter. Even if you don't water for the next 1 week, it continues to grow. Likewise, a person who is in constant remembrance will continue to grow, even if they don't do meditation, even if they don't do cleaning, because they are drawing that subsistence from the subconscious mind only. At the depth of the subconscious mind, once you start drawing energy, then automatically the spiritual progress continues. Ullas had called last week. He said that I have not done some of these practices over the 4 days, but I still feel I'm in a very nice condition. I feel very nice and pleasant and very subtle all the time. So that is something. The constant remembrance, once it is there, it just the journey happens automatically. Babaji did this only. He hardly used to meditate for 2 to 3 minutes. That too because Lalaji was going to ask him, "Are you meditating?" So he had to answer, no. So that's why he used to close his eyes for 2 3 minutes and then open it. And Lalaji knew about it. Lalaji says, "I knew that you were not doing meditation, but I did not bother you because I knew also that you were in constant remembrance. That's why I didn't bother you." Okay. ಸೊ ಗೋಪಾಲ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣ ಇವತ್ತೇನು ಬರೀ ಗೋಪಾಲ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣನೇ ಕೈ ಎತ್ತುತ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾನಲ್ಲ, ಮೂರನೇ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಇವತ್ತು. ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡು.
Thank you. So, how does that at thought level that we pay attention to it, how does that get converted to feeling level and vibration level? Question it, because when we say master, we didn't really attach it to any feeling particularly. How does it automatically get attached to actual master and translated?
Good question. As you progress spiritually, see, constant remembrance is about the master. Initially, like with anything, it's at the level of the thought. So all the things that we actually relate to in the Pindu Pradesh is like a thought. So whatever phenomenon I now expressed is like a thought. So you have not yet developed feelings per se. Now, if the constant remembrance is actually going to hasten your journey, quicken your journey, it's also going to make your system more and more subtle. When the system becomes more and more subtle, automatically you become more and more sensitive to feelings. When you develop the sensitivity to feelings, now the constant remembrance no longer remains at the level of the thought. Now, since you have now graduated to the level of feeling, the constant remembrance also now becomes a feeling. It happens naturally. As long as you're in the Pinda Pradesh, the constant remembrance is more like a thought. I just now explained that. So it goes to the subconscious mind, it settles at the subconscious mind, draws the energy, and it continues to grow. Now, if I were to give you the same example of the plant, how do you know that the constant remembrance has been established in your heart? If it is established in your heart, even if you don't practice for whatever reasons, your condition is not going to wither away. You can still maintain a very subtle condition in spite of some variations in the practice for whatever reasons. But if the constant remembrance is not there, the moment you actually stop practice for some period of time, you will see that the condition is actually going for a toss. In fact, over a period of time, within a matter of few days, you will see that your interest in meditation itself is gone. So it can happen pretty fast, actually. Okay. So this is something that we can actually keep an eye on. Now, if you want to experiment and test it, then you can test it on and off. Don't do meditation for 2 3 days. If I say this, no, all abhyasis will come to me only. He is the only preceptor who says don't practice. So I'll get more abhyasis. But then I am only telling it in the context of experimenting and seeing whether the constant remembrance has been established in the heart or not. It can be trusted. Like I just told you about the plant. Don't water the plant for 2 days. See what happens. If the plant starts withering, that means it is still dependent on your water. If the plant continues to grow without any signs of withering, that means it is no longer dependent on your watering. It can sustain itself from the earth. Got the point? So that's like a test for constant remembrance. Because constant remembrance per se will be out of your conscious awareness. Only when it goes out of your conscious awareness, we call it as constant remembrance. If it's still in the conscious awareness, we no longer call it as constant remembrance. So a person cannot say, I am doing constant remembrance. If a person says, I am doing constant remembrance, that means they are not doing it. Because it's still at the thought level, in the awareness only, in the realm of the awareness. It has to go beyond awareness. Got the point?
Uncle, I have a question here. In terms of constant remembrance and say day-to-day earnings, I think a little a combination of maximum 8 also. So how do you associate that correlation, Uncle? Because sometimes we don't know the where salary part ಹೇಳ್ತಿಲ್ಲ, but where the salary originally originates from in the company, right? How it trickles down. So Avaga, how do you sort of associate constant remembrance from Heng? How do you associate? It's slightly confusing for me. In a
Salary example na kodle illa. I never said about from the perspective of salary.
It's a day-to-day activity, Uncle. This is another question I'm asking. You didn't say about salary, but there's another doubt I have relating to that.
But I think first let this example that we have discussed today in terms of the plant take root. I think once that example actually takes root, it becomes easier for you to then gradually correlate about the salary. Because that is slightly looking from a slightly different perspective. So when you see, that's one of the tricks of learning. First, when you learn, learn one thing thoroughly, one perspective thoroughly. Once it is kind of set in the heart and mind, then it becomes easier to kind of correlate that perspective with other perspectives. When the first perspective itself is still taking root, if you try to take 2, 3 perspectives, sometimes it can be confusing because this is not yet set. Okay, that's why generally we try to give one example that you can actually correlate. Very easy example. And this is something that you can also experiment with. I told you, like the plant. Don't water for 2 days and see. Don't practice for 2 days and see what happens. You will get an idea. But over a period of time, you will also get a confirmation that yes, it has been established. Other sign that the constant remembrance has been established is that you will continue to grow in spite of variation in your practice. Condition starts unfolding much faster. There could be variations in the practice, but the conditions continues to unfold at a faster pace. So compared to a person who just do the normal practice and somebody else who does the normal practice plus constant remembrance, a person with constant remembrance actually evolves much, much faster. Our system itself is a catalyst for faster spiritual progression. If you have constant remembrance, that's like another catalyst being added to the system. That makes it happen even more faster. Okay. Now, I don't need to give you an example of constant remembrance in a day-to-day life. When you fall in love, that's the best example of constant remembrance. Right? When somebody falls in love, they remember the lover all the time, the beloved. Morning you remember, afternoon you remember, evening you remember, night you remember, sleeping you remember. You dream of that person only. All the time you remember without any effort also. So that's one of the easiest examples to take of constant remembrance. Although it only lasts as long as the feeling of love persists. Sometimes for some reason you might get separated, you might stop. Then what happens? The love can be suppressed, but it cannot be expressed. Now that creates a big samskara. Love, when it is suppressed, can create a lot of samskaras. So rather than suppressing the love, what we do in our system is to turn the love towards the divine. All of us have an innate capacity to love. What do we love is what determines our success in life, in spiritual life at least. In material life, we love different things at different times to different extent. That is what happens. Say, for example, you might love a particular car now. 2, 3 years down the line, you might not as much love it. You might want to buy a new car. You might want to do something else. You might want to buy a plane. Who knows? So the love that we have got for things changes. The love that we got for people also changes. But the love that is there for the divine, once established, it cannot change. It can only deepen, intensify. That is what happens. Because what happens with all the finite objects or persons is that the other objects or the person can only reciprocate to a certain extent. They cannot go beyond their limit because they themselves have limitations. But when the love is directed towards the divine is infinite. So if your love deepens, it can also reciprocate infinitely. To the extent that your love deepens, to that extent it can reciprocate. And if your love is infinite, the infinite can also reciprocate to infinitely. So that's the difference in loving a finite object versus loving a infinite object. A big difference. Okay, there is no end to the love. The best example is Lalaji Babuji. There is no end to the love at all between two human individuals, human beings. That's when Lalaji writes the famous statement that I have become you, you have become me. Nobody can now say that you and me are different or separate. So to that extent, and to give another example of that, is Radha and Krishna. Radha was loving Krishna so much that initially she started uttering Radha, Krishna, Krishna. Then the love intensified to such an extent that eventually Krishna started reciting Radha Radha. So this is the extent of love, where it can actually go. Now we are talking about the infinite. In that infinite, there is no end to what extent love can actually grow and take you. But only thing is, you need to learn to love the divine. That's the only thing to be practiced. Once that is done, Allah, everything else becomes naturally, automatically possible. All conditions, all spiritual states, it will just naturally open up by itself. You don't even need to do anything. Practice on and off is sufficient actually. You don't need to be like a machine-like practice, a mechanical practice or ritualistic practice is not necessary. You are now so aligned to the divine that whenever you feel like doing it, you will do it automatically. Okay? So Mogre ಅವರು ಬಂದರು ಬ್ಯಾಟಿಂಗ್ಗೆ. ಕಿರಣ್ ಮೋರೆ ಅಂತ ಒಬ್ಬರಿದ್ರು ಬ್ಯಾಟಿಂಗ್ಗೆ 85 ಅಲ್ಲಿ. ಈಗ ನಾವು ಮೋಗರೆ ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮೋರೆ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಕಿರಣ್ ಮೋಗರೆ. ಹೇಳ್ರಿ.
You started with what heartbreak in humans. You said we can divert it to divine. But is it possible that heartbreak happens even in case of divine?
Yeah, possible. Like you divert the attention from the divine. Suppose you divert the attention from the humans also. You can also divert the attention back from the divine. You might give it for a certain period of time. After that, you might withdraw the attention from that direction. So then two things happen. Either you can stagnate or you can actually fall down, come back. But only thing is, you will have the remembrance of the journey. You will have the remembrance of the experience of the journey. So when you turn your attention back, it becomes faster now because you already have an experience, a taste of it. So in other words, our attention should be fixed on the divine up until we reach the center. Babaji writes, the risk of fall is no longer there when you reach the center and you become fully divinized. Till that time, there is always a risk of fall. Although in our system, there are checks and balances. You don't fall so much. It's not like snake and ladder. There's a snake at 99. If you catch that snake, you will come all the way down to 25, 26. You remember the snake and ladder picture? So it doesn't happen like that because there are some checks and balances. Now that is where your dependence on the guru will help you. Suppose you are now kind of falling. Even if you are falling, if your dependence on the guru is there, the guru is going to create a balance, a check and balance, so that the fall is not too much. It should be easy recoverable. Suppose you are totally out of form and you are in the cricket team and you are about to be thrown out. So if you have a manager that knows you very well, the manager can come to your rescue and say that okay, you can go for 6 months, play the Ranji Trophy, and then we'll keep an eye on you. The moment you regain the form, we'll take you back in the team. Right? So that's the job of the guru. They will come in handy at that time and say, okay, your condition is not currently not, you are not able to sustain yourself at this level of consciousness. Okay, we allow you to come down 1 or 2 steps. You can be at this level temporarily, and once you feel reasonably better, come back to this level again. So that's the job of the guru. So two things absolutely essential: alignment to the divine all the time. Secondly, being what do you say, surrender to the guru. These two are sure short kind of things for success. Just ponder on these two things. So this is very, very important. That's why being oriented to the goal all the time, irrespective of what activity you do in this world, is very important. So when we say being oriented towards the goal, being oriented towards developing subtlety all the time. That's what you're talking about. That's the goal. The goal is highest level of subtlety, which is beyond existence, non-existence. That is the godly state that you have to go to. What is the difference between the current state and that state? And subtlety. You go on developing subtlety till you reach that particular goal. So that's one perspective to have, everyone. Second perspective is to develop that dependence on the guru. Who can actually hasten this subtlety in us? We want to develop subtlety. So you can develop subtlety by your own efforts, or by allowing the nature to work on you, or by taking the help of the guru. Of the three, the fastest way to develop subtlety in your system is the guru. So the more you depend on the guru, the faster the subtlety that develops. That's all it is. Karina. Is that okay? Any more points you want to clarify? Praveen? Anybody else wants to ask anything? Dheeraj, you are going to the training next month.
Yes, brother.
So anything else you want to clarify?
Not right now, brother.
Not right now. So that means later on. Okay.
If I have any clarifications, I will ask.
Varun?
No, brother.
ವರುಣ್ ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ವಿಡಿಯೋ ಆನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಮಗಳಿಗೆ ಜೂಟ್ ಕೊಡಕ್ ಹೋಗಿದ್ದಾನೆ.
ಇಲ್ಲ
ಗೋಪಾಲ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣನು ಅಷ್ಟೇ. ಗೋಪಾಲ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣ ಇದನ್ನೇ ಡಮ್ಮಿ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳೋದು. ಆಯ್ತು, ಆನ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಇಟ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಹೊರಟೋಗೋದು. ಅದಕ್ಕೇನೆ ಯಾವಾಗಲೂ ಬುಕ್ ಓದಿಸೋರು ಅವಾಗ ಚೆಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿರ್ಬೇಕು ಯಾರ್ಯಾರು ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ. ಆಯ್ತು ಆಯ್ತು, ವಿಲ್ ಗೋ ಫರ್ದರ್ ನೌ. So the answer to all this problem is diverting the mind back to the divine. Now, since this diversion of the thought is beyond the capability of a common man, he should attach himself to some great personality who is himself firmly established in the highest plane beyond all possibilities of fall. So, what is the realm from which you cannot fall? Andre, once you have established a permanent connection with the divine, the ultimate, you will not fall. Because once you establish connection with the center, an intimate connection with the center, you will become entirely divinized. So there is no question of fall. The downward tendency of thought indicates that one has descended to a lower plane, assuming a grosser form. In such a case, it is quite essential for him to get himself attached to one of his fellow beings with faith and devotion, so that his downward tendency may be mended by his influence. This will relieve him of all the distracting thoughts. So, how do you know that you are actually gradually aligning to the divine? You will see that unnecessary thoughts which are distracting you gradually starts coming down. That's a sign that you are now gradually aligning to the divine thought or the thought of the origin or the thought of the original or the source or the center or the ultimate or the absolute, whatever you want to call. When you get aligned to that particular thought, the distracting thoughts that is taking your mind in all directions gradually starts coming down. That is why when we actually make a person who is in the college education take meditation sessions, you will see that their distractibility comes down and their concentration increases. So all college going students, 10th, 11th, 12th, they should meditate regularly, at least take once a week, sitting and do the satsang. You will see wonderful results just by doing these two things. If they can practice on and off, that will be even better. So, but one sitting per week and one satsang per week is mandatory, especially Sunday satsangs. Okay. Now, he must also cultivate habits which will be conducive to his effort to shattering the network. For instance, the ear should attend only to noble talks. The eye should only see that which is pious and good. The heart should be inclined only towards that which is virtuous. There may be many such other things which will automatically come to the knowledge if he is after it. Besides this, he must also put in his own sincere efforts to shatter the net. At every stage, there are practices and meditation for this purpose, but a strong will and confidence are essential everywhere. So, strong will and confidence, this is ultimately necessary for everything that you do in spirituality. At different chakras or planes, plexus, there are various knots in the network and still more are under formation. For shattering them, the help and support of one who has shattered his own is really inevitable. The theory deserves careful study. These beings, mysteries so far are now revealed so that people may ponder over them and bring them into practice. After dealing with the subject, my humble request to you, the reader, is that you should try to re-own the latent power, which is the very quintessence of the nature, by breaking up the network interwoven by yourself. Taking up the taking up for the ideal the simplicity of nature, which is before everyone's view, you should set to work for the attainment of the goal in a way that all senses having merged in may become synonymous with that which remains after the fading away of the previous impressions. Then alone can you think of yourself as diverted towards him in the truest sense. In other words, you should become more and more simple. The more simple you become, the more you actually are in the sarupyata with the ultimate. At the 12th point, you develop simplicity and you move over simplicity. So at the 12th point, you develop sarupyata. Then gradually you start moving towards sayuchita. Okay? Sarupyata at the universal level. Not at the individual level, but at the universal level. Because by that time, you would have grown your consciousness to universal consciousness. Okay? The only method can be one that I have described above. One must go on reducing the activities, shaking off all superfluities that has entered into his being for the purpose of shattering his individual network and assuming the purest state one has finally to acquire. This is possible only when he associates himself with one who, having shattered his own network, has had enough swimming in the infinite. So that's the Guru. Okay, pa. I think big achievement. We have moved beyond the fourth maximum now. We've come to the end of it. So hopefully